we ask that the sermon go to our hearts. Lead, guide, and direct us as always, and forgive us where we fail you. Be with the prayer requests that were asked here today, Lord. Answer them according to your will and in your own time. And we'll never forget to give you the honor, glory, and praise. And in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Turn your books to 171. Someday when I'm traveled my last mile here, the call will be coming for me. I'll enter the lifeboat that will be near to carry me over the sea. He'll hold to my hand, hold to my hand, as over death's river I go. Then safe I shall be, safe I shall be, in beautiful heaven I know. My bark shall sail safely, though waves dash high, for Jesus will be at my side. He'll still the rough waters when by and by I'm crossing the river so wide. He'll hold to my hand, hold to my hand, as over death's river I go. Safe I shall be, safe I shall be, in beautiful heaven I know. I'm ready to go to that golden shore, to live there while ages shall roll. I want to meet Mother and saints of yore, in heaven, the home of the soul. He'll hold to my hand, hold to my hand, as over death's river I go. Then safe I shall be, safe I shall be, in beautiful heaven I know.
Well, good morning. Glad to see everyone out today on this wonderful homecoming. And you know, I was reading it's supposed to be pretty warm today, and there's going to be a little bit of cloud cover, so maybe that'll help keep the heat down. But I'll tell you what, it's pretty out there. It's green, and there's not a better day to be out. And if you haven't been down to the fellowship hall, it's smelling pretty good already this morning. So I'm looking forward to that. And hopefully, I'll just tell you now, I tried a new thing. So if you try them and they're bad, you don't tell me, okay? It'll be fine. I tried to make some scones. I had this really cool recipe, and I definitely, they look interesting. So you just tell me, because they're supposed to be cranberries, but guess what? Cranberries aren't in season. I looked, so they're cherry. And I'm not 100% sure that swapping fruits didn't have something to do with the color change of the scones. Because I think they're supposed to be like a brown. They're not. So anyway, hopefully it'll turn out okay. Everything else should be good. We made some lavender lemonade. Get you some of that. I don't know how good it'll be either, but I tried it this morning. It tastes pretty good. So hopefully it'll still be good this afternoon. If we will, I'll ask you to turn to Daniel chapter 4. This morning, what I want to talk about is a really interesting thing. And I didn't really have a way of summing it up well until this morning. I was watching a podcast when we were eating breakfast, and they brought up a really interesting story, and I'll use it as kind of my example this morning to start off with. The speaker was discussing that, I think it was a Father's Day, either a message, maybe at a church or something. I wasn't really 100% sure. I didn't catch the front end of it. I caught the speech part. But the guy talked about, he said that he was talking about it as a parent, but I think this is applicable to all walks of life, just across the board. He said that one of the things you have to realize is that the standards that we live our life by, and the example we set, is the ceiling for us, but it becomes the floor that the next generation will build themselves upon, if that makes sense. And so the way that I set myself up will become then, if should I have children, that will then be the floor that they will walk on. My ceiling that I set, the example I set, that top peak part of my life, in good or bad, is what they will build the rest of their life upon. And I think that's a really interesting point. So here in Daniel chapter 4, we're going to see, I'm going to look at it from both sides of what happens. I think this is one of the most beautiful chapters in the Bible to me because of what is happening here as a whole. We all know King Nebuchadnezzar. He's pretty well known for the rest of the book, the first few chapters of Daniel. But this chapter is interesting to me. And I think that it's really curious when we look at the example of Daniel and then Nebuchadnezzar's example to his own son, and we see a contrast, if you will, of the examples that are set and then what ends up happening. But I want to go to this chapter here in chapter 4. So, it says in verse 1 of Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar the king, unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Now, if you remember just the chapter 4, this is the same Nebuchadnezzar who took our three boys, who I don't like to refer to them as their given name, but I want to use the names originally. That's Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who eventually become Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You've heard that before. Threw them in a fiery furnace because they wouldn't bow down to him when they heard the sound, right? To the point that it was so hot, the men who threw them in there died. Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting to me that event definitely softens his heart somewhat, because we see at the end of chapter 3 that he says, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. And of course then he promotes them. But notice, he didn't leave out that there were other gods too. This is important, because there's going to be another event that happens in Nebuchadnezzar that's going to change his life. A tough one, right? Because he's not changed yet. He's watched what's happened with Daniel up to this point, in terms of having Daniel come and interpret his dreams. He's watched and seen what's happened with the Israelites at the very beginning, when they refused to take the king's meat. And then now we've seen this with the fiery furnace. So there's been a little bit of a change. But this event here is going to alter everything. Verse 4 of chapter 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house, and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Then came in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers, and I told them the dream before them, but they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But, to save the best for last, at the last, Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And before him I told the dream, saying, O Belshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee, and no secret troubleth thee, tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen, and the interpretation thereof. Thus were the visions of my head in my bed. So this is going to be his dream. This is the second time he's had a dream, and he's had to call in Daniel. And you'll notice he denotes that there's a difference in names. See, when Daniel came to the kingdom, he changed all their names. He changed all of the names to make sure they reflected their God, or his gods, I should say, instead of their own God. Because if you look at the names of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, those all are reflective of God. But he wanted to make them reflective of the gods of his people, which is going to be a part of this here. But notice he points out that that's separate. It's important because he's realized there's a distinction. Now, up to this point, he said there's, that the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, still using their new names, that he can deliver. There's something different about him, but he's still amongst the gods, right? He's just and the specific wording there is, there's no other God that can deliver after this sword. See, he's just above. He's just a little bit better than the others, but there's still others. And I'm going to still keep calling him by the name I call him, at least for the moment, until this happens. Now, this is the dream he has. It says in verse 10, we'll start there halfway through, I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher, and a holy one came down from the heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, Hew down the tree, and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, and scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts and the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand of the word of holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, for as much as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. See, there it is again. Holy gods with an S. So the thing is there's this interesting dream. We have this enormous tree that stretches very high, very far. It's fruitful. It's healthy. But then a watcher, someone from heaven, comes down and says, cut it down. But we'll leave the stump. And why? Why leave the stump? Of course, it's got some bands of iron and all those things, parts. The reason that it may stay and let it the 7 times pass over is that to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and that he giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. And that word for basis is the most low. So the thing is, you'll notice here in verse 19, Daniel's a little nervous. It's good when you get to deliver people good news. This isn't a good dream. See, the last time it was a dream, it was more of a saving dream type thing. The dream was one that once he could give him the answer, they were able to protect the kingdom. Yeah, this one's not got a good, there's not a good side to it. So it says here, verse 19, then Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, was astonished, which means astonished, if you will, or in this case, I would use the word more, maybe not, surprise might be a better word for you, because that's not a good dream. What he's just heard is not the best. So it says he was astonished for 1 hour, and his thoughts troubled him. The king spake and said, Belshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. And says Belshazzar answered and said, My lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. He says, this is not a good dream for you, king. This is not a good dream for you at all. Now, remember, Nebuchadnezzar's telling this story. That's important. This is him writing, in this case. And that's an important part to point out. He's telling this. So what is the interpretation? Verse 20 of chapter 4. The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached into the heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwell, and upon the branches the fowls of heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king, that art grown and become strong. For thy greatness is grown and reached unto heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. That's good. He says, that's you, king. That big old tree out there, it's you. We got a big old tree out here in the yard. Stretches up high. Says all the animals dwell there. There's fruit in the tree. It's good. It's healthy. And whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven, and saying, hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass and the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king, that they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. And whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee, after that thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. Now, Daniel's advice here is that, king, you need to get yourself right. Be careful. He said, this is coming to pass. And he says, God's going to judge you for your unrighteousness, which is getting ready to happen very soon. And he says, what you need to do is make sure that you do, he said, turn away from your wickedness and turn away from your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. He says, and maybe that'll lengthen the peace you have now. Now, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't give an answer here. But he told Daniel not to worry about it. Right? But you got to think, I hope it stayed on his mind for at least some period of time. There's a judgment coming to him. And they're going, all he knows is that he'll be driven out from men, and he'll live with the beasts of the field, and he'll eat grass, and he'll be wet with the dew for 7 times. That's not exactly the best of things to look forward to. So, verse 28. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. A year's a long time. Clearly he wasn't thinking about it. Because notice this is interesting to me. Verse 30. The king spake and said, is not... Because this is the part of the dream you remember, is that big old tree. Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? Boy, I'm great. Whew. Glad to have the greatness of my wonderful, look at all this majesty. I did all that. It was me, nobody else. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and the same hour, means immediately, was the same thing, or was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men, and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. So what happens is he lost his mind, loses his senses. Actually, I heard a message on this not too long ago, and it was really apropos, I thought, that they compared this to the prodigal son. In that the prodigal son leaves home. He basically tells his dad, I wish you were dead. Give me my inheritance that I can leave. And he goes off and spends it, goes on a wild, it's a little bit different, but he acts like a wild man, if you will. Spends all he's got, having a great time. Then he ends up in the pig slaughter. And the phrasing in the Bible that I've always thought is really interesting says, and then he came to himself. Which means he was away from himself. Right? There's an implication of that. And here, Nebuchadnezzar's away. This one's by God's decree. In the case of the prodigal son, his was by choice. He chose not to listen to his sensibilities. So here, because of Nebuchadnezzar's pride, God says, I'm going to put you in a place that you're going to learn. You're going to learn who's in control. Now, we don't have exactly a perfect understanding of exactly what 7 times is. I've read that most people tend to feel it's about 7 years. That's a long time. Oh, that's a long time. I also have always thought, I wonder what happens to the kingdom. While the leader of your kingdom is outside in the grass, his nails are grown out, his hair's grown out, and he looks like a bird. I mean, that's what it says here, right? Eagle's feathers and bird's claws. And he's crazy and he's eating grass. That's the king. I don't know who took over the leading of the kingdom. Maybe they tried to hide it, you know. I'm not sure. But for 7 times, however long that might be, he's outside. But notice this in verse 34. Because God is always going to go back to his promises. He gave him, there was a judgment, but he always goes back to the promise he made. And in this case, he said, I will return the kingdom back. Now verse 34, at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven. The phrasing similar. I came back to myself. Right? Yep. And mine understanding returned unto me. And I blessed the Most High. I said, that's different. It's different than one of the gods. Or I blessed a God. I blessed the Most High, which is the same phrasing that Daniel has used to describe God. And I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed nothing. And he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand. Or saying to him, what doest thou? At the same time, my reason returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom and mine honor and brightness returned unto me. And my counselors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. But notice this, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven. It's not his majesty anymore. He says, you're right, I'm going to give it away. All whose works are true, his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride, he is able to abase. Now, I can't help but think, obviously this event is a life-changing one. I can imagine spending any amount of time outside eating grass and living as a beast of the field would change a person pretty quickly, especially when you didn't choose to be there. But in this case, we see Nebuchadnezzar who has been a king who is arrogant and prideful from day one, he's been put down in a place of humility. And what's he do with the last part of his life? Because that's what we'll see here, is he honors God. That's the thing he tells to the kingdom. Notice, he goes out to the entire kingdom. That's verse 1. This was written unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. He says, I've got something I need to tell you. Let me tell you what's happened to me. I can't help but think to myself that this has to do with Daniel's example that's set before him as well as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Their example showed him what kind of person serves the Lord, so that he was slowly moving towards it, but his own arrogance wouldn't get out of the way. So God had to take him, uproot it, if you will, by using maybe that planting example. So that once the arrogance was gone, Nebuchadnezzar could see clearly. Once he got out of his own way, he could finally see the Most High God. And then he could truly give praise to who it should. So in this case then, we see that there is an example being set for Nebuchadnezzar in the people who are under him, ironically enough, but one that he could see that there's something different about him. So that when God finally comes to him, it completely alters his life. Here's the downside. And this is why I think it's important. There's a letter written to the kingdom. That's what this is. This is a letter, a decree, telling this story. And then there's chapter 5. Now notice this is a different name. This is not Belshazzar, it's Belshazzar. There's a difference. One of them is Daniel, which we'll just continue to refer to as Daniel. This one is the son of the king. In this case, I think Nebuchadnezzar does a job of telling the people of his kingdom, but he doesn't do a great job of getting it across to his kid. So notice here in chapter 5, you know both of these stories are pretty common. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Now, it says here it's taken out of the temple. These weren't just glasses. These were important. These were set aside. These were special. And when they looted the temple, they took it with them. But these are not just everyday whatever glasses you drink out of. These were meant to be used for God and God alone. But this man says, you know what? We're having a good time. Let's bring out the fine china, if you will. But it's an insult. And he's got to be aware it's an insult, knowing where it's come from. And it's not even that there's no respect given to it at all. In fact, if anything, it's an ultimate disrespect. So, verse 3, when the king asked him to do it, he brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple, out of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the Most High. No. The gods of gold and of silver and of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. What was made, the cups were made out of, became the gods, rather than the God that cup had been made for. So, in the same hour, came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. He's doing one of those Scooby-Doo moments, right? That's like Shaggy when the ghost comes out, and like knees are knocking together. Here's the thing, that happens. My experience with this was a little bit less so, but I've only had one panic attack in my entire life. But I'll tell you what, I was sitting in a chair and I was shaking. My entire body vibrated. I was so terrified in that moment that I made an irreversible mistake. And my entire body was vibrating. So I'm not shocked that his knees were knocking together when he saw a hand right on the wall The problem is he doesn't understand what it says either. So, what do you do when you don't know what it says? Well, in this kingdom, you call all the people who say they're magicians. So the king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler of the kingdom. And then came all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords was asinine. Now, verse 10 is interesting to me. I think it's an important call to make sure you find the right person to be with. Because in this case, Belshazzar's kind of dumb. I don't really know how else to say it except for he's not exactly the brightest of the bunch. And so the problem is he hasn't listened to anything throughout his time, but the queen has. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. So the queen knows. I'll also say this too, because I'm not 100% sure. This could be Nebuchadnezzar's wife, hypothetically, because she could still be alive, and then the son would have taken over as king. And that is a possibility here, but we're going to assume that it's his wife, because I think that just makes it a little bit easier in terms of what's going here. Either way, someone knows the truth, but they only know a little bit of it. They didn't pay attention entirely, because you'll notice that she also calls him the spirit of the holy gods. Still missing the point. We're close. We're closer than we were. And she says, I know a man who's done some things before and helped your dad. You should call him. So, they bring in Daniel, and he says, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of jewelry? Now, that doesn't mean out of jewelry. That means out of Jerusalem, or Judea, the country. So, verse 14, I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me that they should read this writing, and have made known unto me the interpretation thereof, but they could not show it, the interpretation thereof. And I have heard of thee that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now, this is important. See, he's trying to make a deal with him. Because that's how the gods work. They were heathen gods, right? If we look at like Baal, or if you look at Astaroth, the way they worked is you offer them a sacrifice, and then they might offer you something back. But up to that point, that's not how this is going to work. That's not how Daniel operates either. And that's not how God works. We don't have to, there's not a, if I give you this, you'll give me that. That's not how God works. God works of his own accord. And the thing is, I give things of my own free volition, and I say thank you, God, all the way, whether I get anything back or not. That's how it should work. But see, the king here is, he's so used to that. If I give you this, you'll give me what I deserve. So what does Daniel say? Because I think this is really interesting. Daniel answers him and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty and glory and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him, whom he would slew, and whom he would kept alive, and whom he would set up, and whom he would put down. But when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointed over it whomsoever he willed. And thou, his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this. He said, you saw it, but you didn't listen. But hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. And they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold and brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear not, nor know. And the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. Then was a part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written. Mene, mene, tekel upharsin. And this is the interpretation of the thing. Mene. God hath numbered thy kingdom, and finished it. Tekel. Thou art weighed in the balances, and art found wanting. And you'll notice here it says Perez. There's a reason why. This is actually an important part of taking the words from a sentence and putting it into like words. If you move things in, it can change the phrasing of it. So the word for Perez here is the same thing for a parson. It says, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold about his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night was Belshazzar, the child of the king of the Chaldeans, slain, and Darius, the Median, took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So, we see then an example. And I can keep going with it, because when we talk about Darius, Darius is a really interesting one. Darius knows Daniel. He's heard about him before. That's an interesting thing, isn't it? He's got some fame. And Darius listens to him. So much so that the people get jealous. And that's the whole entire way we get to the line then. It isn't because Darius is a particularly bad person, but it's because he's got just a little bit of pride in him too, and his advisors know how to tweak it. And so, that's what we see here. It says, oh, that's how we'll get him. But Darius is distraught over Daniel. He goes and sees him first thing in the morning. And then Darius listens to Daniel as well. It's a really interesting point for the book of Daniel. But to go back to Nebuchadnezzar, but I think what happens is we see that he has an example set before him, and through the intervention of God, his life changes. So that he then praises the Lord and says that this is the Most High and lifts it up. The problem is, and I have to think this because of the way I see the rest of the book laid out, that letter might be the only time he ever really communicated it. Because the queen doesn't talk about the Most High God. His son doesn't talk about the Most High God. They even still went to all the random people who said they knew things when everything went down. There's not a reflection of that same change that came in Nebuchadnezzar's life in the kingdom. So what was the example he said? And so I think of that example of that ceiling and floor. See, they'd known Nebuchadnezzar. What they know about him? He always served all the gods. That's what they remembered about him. And there was all this, so you think about that. We knew he was a prideful man. His son clearly got that from him. And so that's a ceiling that he set for him. But for some reason, it never got passed on that, let me talk about the real God. Let me tell you the truth about what's happened. Let me tell you about my 7 times, years, months, weeks, out in the grass. Let me tell you about what God showed me. That didn't get to be a part of that ceiling. And And so it never become a part of the floor that the rest of the nation built themselves upon. So I think about this. I actually was reading this the other day. A story is that a man had his life changed. He was saved. He had kids, but he never really talked to him about it. He was so embarrassed about the past, they never really reflected on things that had happened and how God had changed him. Now they went to church and things, but it always seemed odd, and that what ended up happening is his kids never went to church. They never really got involved with Christ. And when they asked about it later, as he was a relatively well-known man, they said, well, it never really seemed important to my dad. But it had been a foundational part to him. And he'd been one who'd been reading his Bible on a regular basis. He had been a good Christian man since he got his life changed, but he never communicated that fact over to his kids. And so the reason I say this is that this actually happens a lot. I've noticed in my life, there are certain things that are really important, that may be important to me. I'll give you an example from my life with one of my coworkers. His name was Daniel. When I worked at Milligan, I was doing sports writing. So we had to write articles up on all the sports events. Well, volleyball was the worst. When they would go travel, we had to wait on the coach to send us the stuff to go write it. Well, sometimes the coaches that were traveling to, they'll get you the stuff when time comes, right? Our coach was good. She'd send us all the stuff, we'd be ready to go. But we wouldn't have anything from the opposing team, which meant I didn't have stats. It's really hard to write a story about a game with no stats, okay? So, this night, I'll never forget this to the day I die. I've been working there maybe a month and a half, and Daniel and I had a decent relationship. But honestly, it was midnight. I got home, and I still hadn't had results. So I went to brush my teeth and got ready for bed. It was about 12:15. They finally came through. And I thought, you know what? They ain't a soul will read this at 12:30, 12:45 at night. I ain't writing the story. I'll do it in the morning. So, I didn't write it that night. I did it in the morning. I come into work next morning. I go sit down to work on the story. There's one already up on the website. And I was like, hey, what's that about? He goes, oh, I just went ahead and wrote it. And he's being weird. He was being kind of standoffish a little bit. And I was like, Dave, what's your problem? What's going on? Tell me what's going on. And he wouldn't tell me. So anyway, I got back. I'll just be honest with you. I'll be true. I got mad at him. I was like, I don't know what's wrong with you, but I don't like it. You're making me mad now. Okay? I was like, Dave, will you just tell me what's wrong? What's your problem, Dad? I'm sick of it. And he said, well, Lucas, he's like, you didn't write the article, and I'm frustrated with you. Daniel, no one's going to read that article at 12:30 at night. I can guarantee you that. No one. This is volleyball. I have 10 people reading it anyway. And they're not going to read that. If they read it at 12:30 at night, I'd be shocked. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, but Lucas, that's not the point. He said, it's important to me that I get the article out as soon as I can, because then it shows journalistic integrity. He said, the point to me is that it's important that it's up and available just in case somebody wanted to read it. Now here's the thing, I didn't know that. I didn't understand that about him. That was an important part to him. It wasn't about the article. It was about that this article is a reflection of his work. Right? And so in this moment, this was a super important part of him that he had not communicated to me. And I said, well, if you just told me that, I'd have done it. I was like, man, that's a totally different story. Now we're going to talk about something totally different. From that day on, I understood who he was. I got it. Because I understood one of the foundational parts of him is that his work is important to him because he sees it as a reflection of himself. And that then I need to take it just as seriously as he does. And if I do, then that means he understands I'm taking him seriously. And to the point that he called me and asked me to come to his wedding. So I got to go in August. All the way down to Atlanta. So the thing is, even to this day, we remain really good friends because of that moment. But here's the thing. Had we never had that conversation, had he never communicated to me every single time, because it got worse. We had a tournament once in basketball. I wrote that article at almost 2 o'clock in the morning. Now I stayed up because I knew it was important to Daniel to have that article out. Had that been the case, I'd wait till the next morning. Right? Because I wouldn't understand it was something important to him. So sometimes in life, I think it's easy for us to not communicate the things we need to that are important to us, not meaning to. This can't be one of them. Writing an article, maybe. That might be a thing. But this part of what I believe, why I believe it and what's important about it, how it's foundational to who I am, how it changes what I do, and how I understand and see the world through it. Those are the things I have to communicate, and not just to your kids. In this case, this was a worker relationship. Right? He was my boss, technically. The thing is, I needed to understand it there. And the good thing was I knew he was a Christian. We had a lot of conversations about it because not everyone was. And so the thing was, is it was important for us to have those conversations because sometimes when things would happen, we'd have the conversation of, hey, this wasn't a very Christian action to do. How do I need to respond in a way that is, how do I respond to this very upsetting situation in a Christian way? We could, yeah, well, sometimes that's what you wanted to do, right? And so the thing is it's interesting that we had this communication. I knew certain things about him, but I didn't know everything. But when I did, when I started to understand who he was, it changed everything about it. And so I think that my point then in this message this morning is homecoming, right? That's the reason why I was thinking about it. Homecoming to me is a day where, one, it's a time where we bring, it's the hope that people come back. Right? Those who have gone away for good, well, usually for the reasons they've moved away, they've gone to family, whatever it may be, they come back together. It's like a reunion, a church reunion, if you will. But there's also, whether we want to admit it or not, there's probably someone who you really hoped you'd see here today who haven't been to church in a long time, you don't know why. Maybe there's a family member who you're really hoping to be here today to the homecoming. And my thought process on this is that we have the opportunity to communicate the things that matter. We do. I'm not saying that it's important that the homecoming is the important part, but I think the operative thing is that, one, we can't give up hope on people. That's what I love about Nebuchadnezzar's story. That's in the end of his life, right? And then look how many times he's been witnessed to already up to that point. Now, it took a pretty big intervention. It took God sending him out into the grass. But he got his life right. And so my thought process on that, one, is that we can't give up on anyone. My prayer is that, there's a number of people I'd love to see here today. A number of them. I ain't giving them hope. There's still time. As long as they're alive, there's still time. I refuse to believe anything different. I just got to keep praying to God to give them a chance. Amen. I got to pray that they'll listen. Right? So that's part one. Number two is that I've got to make sure that I communicate the things that are important so that the people around me know what I hold important. Because if they don't, it's very easy that my son or the people that are closest to me, my co-workers, my family, whatever it may be, don't realize the foundational parts of what made me who I am. Because without God, I'm not who I am. And if I don't communicate it, it's so easy that my spiritual son in turn, because I don't have any kids, my figurative son, if you will, could not understand those important parts of me and turn out just like Belshazzar did and fall into the same traps I fell into. And so I guess this is my final, because honestly I've been on this I guess for weeks now, talking about families and how we relate to one another and how we communicate to one another. I really feel like this is maybe my culminating moment, because I feel like this is it, and we'll go to a different direction next week. At least that's where I'm currently at. But what we have is an opportunity to tell others what's important about to us. That's what witnessing means, right? It's not about going in with a fancy set of words or going in with a pre-written series of things to say. Witness is to tell what you have seen. And in this case, to tell what you've experienced. And that's all I got. In terms of, that's all I have to pass on. I can quote scripture to people all day. But it doesn't help anything if I don't communicate why it was important to me. I'm just some guy standing on a box yelling at people. And so my hope then is that we take it seriously as we think about our interactions, even with one another. What's important to you? And have you communicated that to even to me? Because there may be something that you need to tell me about that I need to know is important to you. And I think that's a really important part of us being here together as a church, as a community, and as a body of Christ. We have important things to communicate. And just like Nebuchadnezzar, one of them is making sure we talk about the praise of the Most High. Making sure we talk about just who He is and what it's done for me. And then that way I won't be so nervous when someone comes up to me and asks me, hey, how do I be saved? Let me tell you my story. Because I think that's the best type of witness you can give. If you will, I'll ask you to pray with me this morning. Obviously, I'll say this as we're going. Don't run out. You got food? There's plenty of food down there. So please join us. Let's have some fellowship together. After church, we'll do a dismissal prayer in just a minute. But if this is the case, I want to open up if you want to come up to the altar this morning, I'm going to get down here myself. As always, I say, I got plenty to pray for myself. There's no reason I shouldn't be there on the altar every single Sunday. Just because I stand behind this old wooden desk don't mean nothing. I got plenty of things I need to ask God to help me work on. I got plenty of people I need to be praying for, and I've got plenty to praise Him for. So whatever the reason may be, if you want to join me on the altar, you're more than welcome. If you want me to pray with you, just tap me on the shoulder, and I'll be more than happy to pray for whatever you need me to with you. But then we'll do that, and then we'll be dismissed in prayer to go down and eat, and we'll have some fun afterward. All right? God, I'm grateful to you this morning. You've given us a beautiful day. You've given us a beautiful church. Opportunity to come praise, honor, Lord, I just thank you. I want you to be with us. I need to know what's important. In that story of time before, and see the story of the dollars and give you praise and thanks for all. So grateful. Praise your name.
You give all the praise you can, Lord. We give you all the thanks for your Son, Jesus Christ, who died for us, Lord. We may have that hope, Lord. It's going to be with you in heaven, Lord. Be with us, you're with us. So let this day, Lord. For some of our Savior, we ask. Amen.
Amen. As I said, food is down in the fellowship hall. Make sure you don't leave without some. Don't tell me about how the scones were. If they're bad, I'm sorry. Secondly, you can tell me all about how good my enchiladas are, though. Come praise me all you want, and I'll tell you it was a Betty Crocker recipe. Now, without that, I'll also say next week we have the singers coming. There's no name but his next Sunday night should be here, and then there's no services this evening. So go visit another church if you get an opportunity. It'll be good. And the Bible study on Thursday, Mark, we're going to 11 and 12 this week, right? That's right. Yeah, 11 and 12. So make sure you read up on it and come prepared to talk about it. Let's see. Sam, would you mind praying over the food for us before we head on down?
Heavenly Father, thank you once again for the opportunity to be in your house today, Lord. Be with us, Lord, the fellowship over the food that you prepared for us, Lord. Give you thanks and praise, honor,